Bobby Sands didn't want to die. And Bobby Sands wanted to live. Bobby Sands had an awful lot of living to do. He had an awful lot of potential. What the Brits done in the jails forced him into that position.
In 1981, 10 men, Irish Republicans, died on hunger strike protest in the H blocks of Longcash Prison in the north of Ireland. This hunger strike was the culmination of 5 years of prison protest and 12 years of civil unrest and guerrilla warfare. Unrest which began with the Campaign for Civil Rights in 1968.
First became involved with the Republican movement in the aftermath of Bloody Sunday, when I watched 13 people being shot dead by the paratroop regiment. On the 2nd of February 1977, I was arrested in Derry City. I was taken to Castlereagh and held for 7 days. I was held in remand for 23 months, and I was sentenced in front of a Diplock court to life imprisonment, and I've been there ever since.
In 1971, internment without trial was introduced, and following a hunger strike in Crumlin Road Jail by Billy McKee, Republican and Loyalist detainees were treated as special category prisoners.
Basically what it was is that we had political segregation. We also had the right to wear our own clothes, and we also refused to participate in prison work. We had a large degree of control over our own lives within the cages. You could put it down to our very lifestyle was a recognition by the British that we were political prisoners.
However, in the mid-70s, in an attempt to undermine Republican support, the British government developed new propaganda strategies, including the removal of special category status and the criminalisation of prisoners.
There is no such thing as political murder, political bombing, or political violence. There is only criminal murder, criminal bombing, and criminal violence.
As far as I was concerned, I had been arrested under special laws. I'd been sentenced in a special court. There were special circumstances going on in my country. And then they decided when I reached prison that I was a criminal. I was no criminal. As far as I was concerned, none of us who were in that prison on a political charge were criminals. We were political prisoners.
On March the 1st, 1976, special category status was removed. Kieran Nugent was the first Republican to be arrested after that date.
4 or 5 warders came in, forcibly held me down and removed all my own clothing. He left me lying there naked in a bare cell for about 20 minutes, where then one of them came in and threw an old grey blanket, which I placed around myself. The governor came around the next day and again asked me and then ordered me to wear prison clothes. I refused.
So the prisoners, if you like, became pivotal, and I think it was the one thing perhaps that the British overlooked.
In 1977, I became OC of the Republican prisoners in the cages of Longcash. This entailed myself going out every morning to the governor's office, sitting down, and the governor referring to me as Mr. Hughes or Brenton, and I would go out with a list of problems or arguments that we had between the administration and ourselves, and myself and the adjutant, my next in command, would come with me, and we would sort them out over a table. Often they would offer us coffee, and it was very relaxed sort of position. Because they treated us as prisoners of war, and we treated them as our jailers, and we had to negotiate with them. So in 1977, that was the position I was in. There was something like 500 prisoners in the cages at the time. In January of 1978, the H blocks had been going for 2 years. And a decision was taken that I would be taken from the cages of Longcash and transferred to the H blocks of Lancash. That morning, I was taken in a van down to H block 5. I walked in through the reception to the reception area, and I was immediately referred to as Hughes 704.
In the H blocks, like here, I found myself locked up in a cell 24 hours a day, and I had no control at all. I had nothing. You know, I knew that the screws were now in total control of my life, and it depended on their goodwill to allow me even the basics of a day-to-day life, to go to the toilet, to slap out, to brush my cell, to clean my cell. They had total control of that whole aspect of my life.
That's Sunday, and it's the only time we seen each other. I walked in till the Mass, where we hold Mass, and I'll never forget it, the impression that it left on me. They had long hair, long beards. No one had shaved their haircuts for 2 years. The eyes were bulging. Right? I don't know why, but everybody's eyes seemed to be sunk or bulging or something. And when I walked in, there was quietness, right? Because I was the only one there without a beard, right? And the only one there who looked healthy, because they all looked very pale and sickish. I knew in my heart that the protest on the outside wasn't taking off. The blanket men had been here for 2 years, and after a few days, you hear the cliches, and in the middle of the night you'd hear somebody shouting out, "Does anybody care? Does anybody know what's going on out there?"
My first son was arrested in 1976, early 1976, just when the British government had decided to remove political status. I found this very painful, very difficult, because first of all, they didn't give us any visits or anything, and we were only hearing second-hand information about how badly the young prisoners had been treated at the onset. So I can tell you I didn't feel very good about it. That's when I began to kind of go around people and try and organise, try and make people aware of what was happening in Lancash.
It was wives and sisters and mothers and friends of prisoners who in Belfast simply said, "We've had enough," and they started on a very ad hoc basis at first, started the relatives action groups and simply standing on the White Line picket, which became synonymous with the RACs later. But basically women just went out into the middle of the road and said, "My son is not a criminal. My husband is not a criminal, my companion, my brother, my friend, these are not criminals, and we don't accept the criminals. And we're going to stand in the middle of the road and say that they're not criminals."
From local beginnings in the 6 counties, the Relatives Action Committees campaigned throughout the 32 counties and abroad, telling the world about the prisoners' plight.
I think the main weapon that the jail administration drew upon to break it was brutality. In fact, I think that the blanket protest itself was just one big long catalogue of brutality. On a blanket, we were deprived of all possessions. They introduced a mirror search where people would be asked to squat naked over a mirror. The mirror search existed for the most of the blanket period, and people had to get a mirror search on Sundays, coming and going from Mass, going and coming from a visit, and on a weekly basis as a result of a wing shift. Most of the wings were moved every week for cleaning cell purposes. But it was just an excuse to allow sort of physical contact between ourselves and the screws, and that was just a recipe for beatings. The screws themselves being loyalists and whatever, there'd be an element of ill treatment that would come from that alone.
They stepped up the harassment on men going back and forward to the showers, to the point where they were actually badly beaten men going back and forward to the shower. So that brought about the no wash. We says, right, we are not washing anymore. We're not coming out to wash because of the hassle, because of the harassment, because of the beatings. And that was the start of the no wash protest.
Following on from this, the prisoners were prevented from emptying their chamber pots, and so were forced to smear their excrement on the cell walls, which was the start of the dirty protest.
We're political prisoners! We want political status!
In Armagh prison, the women were also receiving brutal treatment, including on one occasion beatings during searches by uncontrolled male prison officers.
And there was very bad beatings, because what they did, the female screw opened the door, the male screws moved in, they had their shields and their baton, and 2 or 3 of them would jump on one woman. Well, jump the 2 of us, of course, but 3 of them had to hold the one down, spread eagle down in the bed, and they put the shield on top of you, and then they got on top of the shield on top of you and held you down while they dragged the other one out, down the stairs, down the adjudication. So they kept us locked up. We had no toilet facilities in the cell, so we had only chamber pots. We said, you're going to have to let us out, because being so long in a cell, 2 in a cell, only 1 chamber pot, obviously the slaps was going to overflow. They says, no, you're not getting out. We says, we're entitled to our statutory 1 hour. Under the European Court, we're entitled to 1 hour's exercise. They said, okay. They eventually arranged 4 or 5 of us got out to the yard at a time to have exercise, with male screws walking around behind us. We said, right, leave the toilet facilities open, and we'll just go out on our way to the yard. But they wouldn't even allow that. So we'd no other option. When they opened the doors to leave the food in, we just slopped out on the wing. And that's how the no wash began.
In July 1978, Cardinal, then Archbishop O'Fee, visited Long Kesh and was appalled at the conditions of the prisoners on the dirty protest. He compared the blocks to the slums of Calcutta. The Cardinal, though, found the men's morale high, maintained through various survival strategies centred around the Irish language.
For instance, you would have your formal Gaelic class, say at a certain time in the day, but you would have found the same people doing Gaelic classes with, say, their mate down next door to them or a couple of cells down. Outside of that there, we used to have some materials which we would come across now and then, say a political lecture or a political paper which would have provided stimulus for political discussion, because I think a lot of people now who are in the movement have probably found the basis for their critical thinking at that time on the blanket, which came from discussions, is that,
After that, then obviously, because people were denied the small sort of luxuries of life, like tobacco, things like that, you had this sort of intricate system of smuggling tobacco into the prison. Once it was in a cell, you had people then sort of designed, they split it up among the smokers. And once it had been split up among the smokers, they had a network where, because we had no contact with cell to cell, you had men who were called scooters. And basically what they done was they would have, by various means, stole buttons off the uniform, be it in visits or when we went to mass, and they would have attached the thread from the blanket or the towels, and underneath the door would have flicked it, and it would have sort of intertwined with one another, and then that became what was known the line, and that's where the cigarettes would have went across and up and down the line.
Kiko Halloran, right? The person who kept the wit going. Right? When everybody was down, Kate would get up and sing a song and play the boron on the cell door. Or Bobby would get up and tell a story. Jet, anybody that was in the blocks knows the story of Jet. Right? It was a story that a book that Bobby read years ago, and he got up and was able to tell the story out the door. There was a time in Hits 6 when we had tobacco, we had cigarette papers, but we had no flints. And I had a visit that day, and I got the flints on the visit. And coming back, I was asked to open my mouth, the screws were going through my mouth, so I swallowed the flints. Right? So I went back to Hits 6 and we were told to isolate it. And everybody was down for a smoke. There was just no flints, and I was constipated. Right? And for 5 days, the flints sat in my stomach, and every day, Bobby was a smoker like myself, craved for smokes, and every day or every hour, sometimes I got a rap on the wall saying, "Has the eagle landed?" as the eagle landed. Right? And I mean, characters like that, situations like that, are bred and brought about the type of love and comradeship that I'm trying to talk about, real concern.
In the particular wing I was on, Joe McDonald would have been the sort of head man tobacco, right? So they used to sort of count how many smokers is in the wing, you know, and sometimes there was more smokers in the wing than there was actual people on the wing. So the socialism was sound, but we had dead men too at the same time. It's the same with books. Joe again would have been one of them people. He would ensure every night that there was a book out the door, and somebody would have shouted up, "Well, Joe, what about you for a book a night?" But Joe was always the perfect excuse for not telling him. Joe, I think people sort of seen Joe's motivation was obviously when a book was being told there was silence. So for Joe it was a handy way of nodding off for the sleep that particular night.
In response to the dirty protest, the authorities subjected the prisoners to forced washings.
What was worse, really, was hearing people screaming down the wing a bit. You really heard the screams and the battering and the roaring. And say you're up the wing waiting for your turn, and your turn's not going to be for about another hour. That breeds some type of natural tension in you. And you'd be sitting terrified. You know, you're only a youngster at the time. Only about 22 to 20. Some guys were only about 18. And once they got me, I just cuddled up down. I had my towel on, and I had tied the towel in a knot here because I didn't want to be naked. Because even with towels, no defence, it gives you some type of feeling that some type of defence, it's a silly defence, but it gives you some type of a feeling, you know. Then they got me out the door, dragged me out the door by the hair. They were trying to kick me and knee me and stuff like that, but I covered my face, stayed well covered up. They dragged me out the door. We were took down the wing. I had no towel on, it was ripped off at this time, so you're naked. Put onto a chair, a plastic chair, and they would be sitting like this here. My buttocks were just on the edge of the chair, like this. My hands would be twisted away up. There's 2 big Scotchmen had me, and there'd be a ring of screws, 7 or 8 all around you, insulting you, shouting abuse, slapping you and laughing, etc. This particular one came in front of me and he knelt down his hunkers and he punched me about 12 times in the face. I was trying to ride the punches, you know, it hit you, you know, like that. I was trying to ride it. Funny enough, I don't think I really felt them. Probably the adrenaline, you're up to the millions, you know. And while they held me down, the other guy came along to shave the hair off. Then they would grab you, run you down. What happened to me was, again, grab the hands round the back, ram it down towards the wing grills. They're trying to get my head to hit the grills. Sounds ridiculous, that's what they tried to do. Caught me in the shoulder, actually. Ran me over the other wing. Threw me into a bath, scalding water in the bath. There was a notorious screw there. He's dead now. The IRA blew him up in a booby trap about 2 years ago. And he was doing the scrubbing. He had a handbrush, and he would scrub you all over the head, the face, the body. You'd lift your testicles up underneath, etc. And then they would drag you out off the bath. When they took me out of the bath, I seen a fella lying on the floor, Bernadette McAliskey from South Derry. Some said his face was all red. You could see a formation of 2 black eyes starting, big red eyes. It must have really gave him a bad day. And he was lying out, he was unconscious, he was just lying out on the ground naked, spread eagle. And they dragged me over where it was a doctor. The real strange scene. You know, a doctor wearing a white coat and a medic and a couple of R screws. And they painted us with some type of disinfectant or something, you know, some type of lotion, painted all over your body. And the doctor's taking off fit, you know.
I never hated, I don't think I ever hated anybody in my life. Right? But I got to hate the screws in that jail. I didn't get nearly as much beatings or as many of the boys did. But I remember been totally frustrated, very, very angry. That angry that I kicked the cell door, the steel door, kept kicking it and shouting, because I used to listen to the younger prisoners getting beaten and squealing, crying at the top of the wings.
The inhuman treatment endured by the prisoners in the H-blocks and Armagh jail during this period was not without precedent. On May the 11th, 1946, Belfast Republican Sean McCaughey died in Portlaoise prison after 17 days on hunger and thirst strike, after more than 4.5 years in solitary confinement, with only a blanket. In 1920, Terence McSweeney, the Lord Mayor of Cork, died in Brixton prison after 74 days on hunger strike. 2 other men, Joseph Murphy and Michael Fitzgerald, died on this hunger strike. Thomas Ashe, a commander in the 1916 Rising, died in 1917 after being force-fed on hunger strike. Throughout the early period of the Free State, Republicans died on hunger strike. In the 1970s, Republican prisoners held in English jails began to go on hunger strike, seeking transfer back to prison in Ireland. In 1974, Michael Gaughan died after being force-fed. In 1975, the Price sisters, Hugh Feeney and Jerry Kelly, succeeded in being transferred following a hunger strike protest. By 1979, despite the recent death of Frank Stagg on hunger strike, it was again discussed by prisoners as an option in the battle against criminalisation.
And in 1979 we discussed it. We had come through all that suffering, and I believed it was time to bring it to a head. And through discussions with Bobby and others in H6, I sent a communication to outside informing them that we were planning a hunger strike, the final move. Within days, I got a communication back advising me strongly against it and asking me to hold back, to carry on, that give outside a chance to put pressure on, to try and avoid hunger strike.
By the end of 1979, the prisoners' supporters formed the National H-Block Armagh Committee and stepped up the international campaign on the prisoners' behalf. They formulated the 5 demands to meet the prisoners' call for political status and to attract wide popular support. At the same time, Cardinal O'Fee was involved in a long series of talks with British direct ruler Humphrey Atkins.
The Cardinal had visited. I've met the Cardinal twice during the H-Blocks. The first time he came in, I remember talking to him in the cell, and I remember him being very, very touched and involved with what was going on. Or very, maybe touched isn't the right word. He was very emotionally upset by what was going on. So this intermediary was coming up and informing me of the negotiations taking place between Atkins and the Cardinal. And right through that period, the intermediary was very, very hopeful.
As support for the blanket men gathered momentum, the National H-Block Armagh Committee came under attack from Loyalist and Crown forces. In October 1980, the Atkins-O'Fee talks broke down completely. Danny Morrison brought the news into the jail.
I knew right away as soon as I seen Danny, because Danny was totally shattered. He didn't know how to tell me, and I said to him, "Danny, what is it? Tell me what the problem is." And he says, "The whole thing's fell through. Right? The Brits have just pulled the rug out from under O'Fee." That's what he said. And he just looked at me, gave me a cigar, and said what he's going to do now. And I simply says, "We have no alternative. We have to go on hunger strike. We have nothing left." And Danny said to me, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Danny, what else can we do? Tell me." And Danny just couldn't say anything. So that's when the decision was taken. Right? Well, that's when I took a decision and informed Danny to go outside and tell the people what our decision was going to be.
Well, it's not so much where you would believe that you're going to die. It wasn't a decision where you're saying, I'm going on this hunger strike and I'm going to die. No, because what you do was you said, we have demands, right, which was the same as what our comrades were enjoying 200 yards away from us. So I think the decision was made that you were going to force a lot of people to make decisions. You're going to make a lot of people who were maybe sitting on the fence talking about solutions and saying them, here is one way now of settling it.
On the 27th of October, 7 men began hunger strike. They were Brendan Hughes from Belfast, Leo Green from Lurgan, Tom McFeely from South Derry, Sean McKenna Newry, Thomas McCartney Tyrone, John Nixon Armagh, and Ray McCartney from Derry City.
The whole system in Northern Ireland, both special arrest, special court system without jury, has proved to us beyond all doubt that these courts are set up to convict men just to convince people that we are criminals, which we are not. We are a product of the political troubles in Northern Ireland to this moment.
On December 1st, they were joined by 3 women in Armagh, Mairead Farrell, Mairead Nugent and Mary Doyle.
I personally thought about it, well, we had been talking about it for months beforehand, well before the men embarked on it, and I personally had to take into account my family. I was thinking more of my father, what way, he would be, and it was a very hard decision, and it wasn't took lightly. In fact, it's far worse on your family and friends than it is on yourself, because you feel that they're going through a lot more than what you are. And it was a hard decision to make.
During the hunger strike, there were massive demonstrations at home and abroad in support of the prisoners. Meanwhile, negotiations, both secret and public, were taking place with the British authorities. And by mid-December, with Sean McKenna on the verge of death, the British government presented a document to the prisoners.
The movement on the outside were in contact with the Brits, and an intermediary came in to see the hunger strikers on the last day of it. I think he'd been in previously as well. He told us that there was a document available which would form basically and satisfy the 5 demands. So towards the evening time, he was actually to return to the jail with the document, and he was to collect it at, I think, Aldergrove Airport from some Foreign Office official. And about 6 in the evening, Sean McKenna's condition throughout the hunger strike had been probably the worst of all the hunger strikers. From a very early on period, he wasn't able to walk and whatnot. And that particular evening, towards 6 or 7 o'clock-ish, Sean was lapsing in and out of a coma, so he was being moved out at the time. Sort of the knowledge of the document on the way to the camp, and the beliefs and expectancy that this would satisfy the substance of the 5 demands of the hunger strike. The hunger strikers had a meeting in the hospital, and we decided to end the hunger strike.
Bobby Sands, the officer commanding the Republican prisoners in the H blocks, was taken by the prison staff to each block to inform the officers commanding in each block that the hunger strike had ended, and it had ended on the basis of a document that had been presented by the British government to the hunger strikers, that within that document there was the core of a settlement.
The document arrived into the jail, and well, it did actually represent a solution to the situation, and it would have satisfied the 5 demands had the British been interested in it. It certainly, I think the test of the whole situation was going to be their intent.
When Bobby came back, he spoke out the door to all the lads, telling them the crack that the Brits had agreed a process which could provide a solution. He had said that the end of the first hunger strike had provided an opportunity for the British to settle, that they had provided the basis of a solution, but that would depend on how they implemented it.
In January 1981, As a first step towards resolving the protest, men on two wings agreed to come off the no-wash protest, and the prison authorities would allow their relatives to bring in their own clothes.
The problem then arose when the relatives arrived with the clothes at the gate. The clothes were not allowed in, and the prisoners were then told that there were no clothes for them. And as a direct response to that, and as a direct, because again the Screws seen this as a green light. They seen that here was us trying to move towards a settlement. We hadn't got it, and the British were obviously blocking it, so that was a green light. So you had the start of harassment immediately.
All attempts by the prisoners to resolve the issue came to nothing. The Northern Ireland office and the prison authorities refused to make any concessions. A second hunger strike became inevitable.
Bobby was probably to the fore in arguing the need for a second hunger strike, and he sent a comm to outside saying that after discussions in the wing, there was a majority view that a second hunger strike was a feasibility and was a possibility. And he got a comm back which nearly bit his head off. That's a letter from the leadership of the movement on the outside, basically saying, are you crazy? There's no way that you're going on hunger strike. We're just out of a hunger strike. There must be somebody in there that's not thinking straight.
The first hunger strike had burnt the people out. They had burnt out our resources, spiritually, physically, etc. And some people felt you couldn't really put the people through the same grind again. It would be too much. But at the same time, we had a dilemma. And the dilemma was nothing had changed. Absolutely nothing had changed. Criminalisation policy was still going ahead. You had to wear a prison uniform, do prison work, etc. So the very fundamentals of criminalisation still existed.
Bobby was fairly clear in his arguments. He stated that the prison would be turned into a breaker's yard for Republican activists, that the British would process people through Castlereagh, through the Diplock courts, into the H-blocks, and would grind them down, would demoralise them and attempt to break the prisoners, and through breaking the prisoners, break the community and break the will to resist. And he was adamant that that wasn't going to happen.
27-year-old Bobby Sands from Belfast began the hunger strike on March the 1st, 1981. Sands, a prolific writer, recorded his experiences in prison and on hunger strike in his poems, stories, and in his diary. In the following 3 weeks, he was joined by 3 men. Francis Hughes from South Derry, once described as the most wanted man in the north after a series of daring military operations. Raymond McCartney from South Armagh, remembered by his friends for his good humour and determination. And Patsy O'Hara, a member of the INLA from Derry City, who at 23 was the youngest hunger striker. Bobby Sands celebrated his birthday on the 9th of March.
Bobby's birthday came in the first 2 weeks of his hunger strike, and he was up at the door that night, best of crack. We got Big Tom McElweeda, couldn't sing. Big Tom hated singing, so he got up onto the 2 lids of the chamber pots, put them at the door, and tap danced. He had Bobby up singing, back up doing as usual, singing the rest of the night away when everybody had finished. So it was that kind of crack, and everybody just wishing him a happy birthday. And probably sounds a wee bit odd to people in the middle of all that you're having a party, but it was a party. It was good crack.
The campaign was given an unexpected boost with the unfortunate death of Frank Maguire, the MP for Fermanagh South Tyrone, a long-time supporter of the prisoners. The H-Block Armagh Committee felt a candidate standing for the prisoners should contest the by-election, and Bernadette McAliskey put her name forward, as did Noel Maguire, the late MP's brother. Republicans were also considering that Sands himself should run. McAliskey and Maguire stood down, to allow Sands a free run.
Austin Curry then put his tuppence in the ring, declaring that if the field was cleared, Curry would put his papers in. As it happened, it all worked out all right, but it was like something out of high noon in Dungannon that morning. As far as I understand it, Gerry Adams was in the chapel. Whether he was in the confessional or not, I don't know. But Gerry Adams was in the chapel to the left of the electoral office as you come out of it, waiting to get in and get the papers out if they had to come out. And a number of people stationed along the road watching to see if Austin Curry had come to put his papers in. And I think that there were a number of other people, quite independent of the Republican movement or anybody else for that matter, that if Austin Curry had gone up the steps, somebody would have broken his legs. Some non-violent, non-Republican person would, rather than have let him up those steps, some Tyrone person would have broken his 2 legs. As it turned out, Bobby Sands was the unopposed nationalist candidate.
For each candidate at the election was as follows: Sands, Bobby, anti-H block, Armagh, political prisoner, 30,492.
Bobby's election gave all of us the boost that not only was it the prisoners against the British government, that here was a sign that nationalists in Ireland were clearly on the side of the prisoners, that there was that we were political prisoners, and no argument over it anymore. The argument was then over what conditions we would live under.
And I think when the British reaction to Bobby's election was simply to bring in legislation preventing the next prisoner from standing, we knew that what they were going to do was allow Bobby Sands to die and then make sure that we couldn't stand another prisoner in his place.
During the hunger strike, there were visits by individuals and delegations supposedly attempting to resolve the dispute. One such visit was from the papal envoy John McGee.
I do not plan to return today.
I was quite prepared to see the kind of intervention by the Pope as one thing and one thing only. It was meant to send in some high-ranking person to bring that kind of moral authority to bear and kind of psychological pressure to bear to get the men to stop their hunger strike. I couldn't see it as anything else, and it was a purely political exercise.
On March 23rd, Bobby Sands was removed to the prison hospital.
So Bob was taken out, and a lot of the lads just up shouting. I can't remember anything above anything else because it was just them only shouting up the wing. Okay. I was feeling, well, that's it, I was fairly certain that Bobby was going to die. And although you still hope at the back of your mind, and I knew when he was going out through the yard into the van that was it. That was the last you were seeing him.
I remember on one occasion when Bobby Sands was close to death, and I was coming away from visiting Raymond McCartney at the time. He was just down the corridor from Bobby, and I got an opportunity to call in to see Bobby, and I think he may have been a day or two away from dying. And I opened the cell door, and I have this vivid picture in my head of his mother was by his bedside. His sister was sitting also close to him. He was lying on the bed itself, and there was a cage covering his body where the clothes were placed across the cage so that the clothes wouldn't touch his skin. And he was gaunt, had lost an awful amount of weight. His face was thin, and his eyes were a bright orange colour. And he detected some movement in the cell, and he looked towards it, and he said, "Is that you, Jim?" And I said, "It is, Bobby." He says, he stretched out his hand, and he said, "I'm blind, or I'm almost blind. But tell the lads I was asking, and that I'm going to see this thing through. I'm hanging on in."
it's hard to describe. You're waiting, you know what's going to happen. Bobby Sands was always going to die. All the blanket men knew it. And the point about it was he was dying for you. You know, it was a great battle going on. It was a great battle against the Brits going on. Great battle for our ultimate objectives going on. Bobby Sands knew them. He knew better than most of us. And he could articulate them better than most of us. But the bottom line, to a lot of us at that time too, was Bobby Sands wasn't only dying for the future of the country, but he's also dying for them as individually, because we were caught up in a Pacific situation. And it was like your brother dying, just like one of your own family, because that's what the blanket had become at that time.
On the 5th of May, after 66 days on hunger strike, Bobby Sands MP was the first hunger striker to die. His death was met with widespread sadness, anger and protest. Over 100,000 people attended his funeral.
And build a movement strong, with bullet box and army light, and music and song. He was a poet and a soldier. He died British free, and be given 3,000 votes of mine. Hey.
It affected people differently. Some people cope with it very well. Because their emotions had been tempered by all those years of experiences. I had no great emotional outburst about it. I felt down. I think maybe now, thinking back on it, probably scared to let myself go down, because I knew the battle was still on and running. Francie Hughes was on the hunger strike, and 2 other lads were on the hunger strike. And that may have been a common theme amongst some of the men, that you wouldn't let your guard down. You wouldn't let your emotions show. You wouldn't come out with it, possibly because the battle was on and running. It wasn't over yet.
Sands' death was followed by that of Francis Hughes on the 12th of May. On its way to Derry, Hughes's funeral cortege was attacked by angry loyalist mobs and Crown forces. The British remained intransient. The southern establishment, the church and the SDLP remained firmly on the sidelines. Raymond McCartney died 9 days later, followed by Patsy O'Hara within hours. O'Hara's body arrived in Derry with broken bones and cigarette burns. Their deaths did not affect the resolve of the other prisoners to go on. Bobby Sands was replaced by Joe McDonnell, a 31-year-old Belfast man with a wife and 2 young children. The other 3 were replaced by Kieran Doherty from Belfast, Kevin Lynch, an INLA volunteer from North Derry, and Martin Herson, who came from a farming family from Capel, County Tyrone. Many others in the prison waited to be called to go on hunger strike.
Like a lot of people, I was busting to get on the hunger strike. A hunger strike was like the front line, and that's where you wanted to be. You know, you weren't keen to sit back. You wanted to get forward. And after the experience of Brenton McLaughlin, who developed an ulcer during a hunger strike, things like that happened. You didn't know. You wouldn't know if you had an ulcer until you went on hunger strike. It happened to Bernard Fox too. Look, it happened to Martin Herson. Martin Herson developed a whole series of complicated physical reactions to the hunger strike, which killed him, and a few others, happened on a few others. So the rest of the camp were told, especially people who had their name down for the hunger strike, were told to ensure that they were in good physical shape. Well, I wasn't. I had serious infections in my ear, so I put my name down. I see a doctor, and next thing, before I knew it, I was getting took out for an ear operation. And what they done was that night they put me in the prison hospital to stay overnight. And And I was up to all sorts of wee schemes to get out of the prison ward, the cell, to get up in the association, because new hunger strikers had been there, and the screws wouldn't wear it. And about 8 o'clock or so, just before lockup, I was just lying in the bed, and a massive big thump in the door, and I shit myself, jumped up. Joe McDonald, or Scraw, raking about. Joe was at the door, and they were yelling me over, and I goes over to the door, and Joe was there, Kevin Lynch was there, Barabbas. I knew Barabbas well, I knew Kevin well, because I didn't know him before a blanket, right? But when I first went on the blanket, he was next door, and we used to talk at the pipe a lot, you know, and he's a bit of a character. And they're standing there, and they're saying things to you like, we'll get you some fags down, you want some fags down? Or Joe McDonald, I remember Joe McDonald saying to me, Joe's a schemer, everybody knows that Joe's like, you know, he's just an ordinary bloke, bit of a schemer, you know. Joe saying to me, Pickles, there's milk and cheese in the fridge. This is a hunger striker. There's milk and cheese in the fridge. You know, make sure you get up there and get some out there, you know. What do you say, you know? How do you respond to that there, to a guy who's on hunger strike? I'm busting for the milk and cheese, but at the same time, they're not all that busting. They sort of temper any hunger that's in you. And all the time, Big Doc was standing behind them, you know, leaning against the wall, and he's just watching me, you know. One of the things I remember about Big Doc, which tells a lot about him, I remember Gary Roberts telling me, Gary Roberts was a young fella on the blanket, and I remember Gary Roberts telling me after the blanket, when we were talking one time, that he used to love to go over to Big Doc during Mass and Sunday, on the blanket. Gary's in another wing, and just to talk to Big Doc, for Big Doc to turn around and say to him something like, don't let them bastards annoy you, or just something like that. I even know the whole canteen would have said it, tell you, would have give you something. When Doc said it, tell you it meant millions, because he represented everything which was resistance against the regime, and a whole lot of guys looked up to him, but they also knew the screws, etc., were scared of him, physically scared of him, and that gave him a wee boost inside. And because he was a silent type, it seemed to add something special to his character, you know. I was in the cell room at the time he went on a hunger strike, a second hunger strike, and we had been in this wing, and the wing was sort of like a family. We all knew each other inside out. You knew everything about each other's brothers and sisters and all the rest of it, because you get burnt out after a while telling all your teenage exploits out the window or out the door, or making them up as you go along, you know. But they moved me out of that cell the first day he went on hunger strike, and they moved me over to another wing. So I only seen him a couple of times after that. And one of the times, the last time I seen him, I didn't really know what to say to him. I wanted to say all the profound statements that you want to say to someone who you're very close to, you know. But there's nothing coming out, you know. The door was locked, you see. I thought about this millions of times, because sometimes you feel a wee bit guilty about it. And I've realised now what it was, which was the barrier, maybe the emotions. I think it was the door was locked. I couldn't get out. We couldn't get through the door, you know. But Joe and Kevin then cleared off. They were getting locked up, and Big Doc came over to the door. We just said a few words to each other, and he's saying, look after yourself, etc. And I was saying the same. And he was getting called up to get locked up, and that was the last I seen him. The next morning, I wanted to go in and see him again, but they were taking me to RBH, and it was early, and the screws told me hunger strikers were asleep. I didn't want to waking them up, you know. That was really the last I seen him.
In June, more men joined. 23-year-old Tom McElwee from South Derry, a cousin of Francis Hughes. He was engaged to Dolores O'Neill, an Armagh prisoner. Mickey Devine was 27, from Derry City, and a founder of the INLA. He would have been out of prison in September 1982, but instead he chose to go on hunger strike. Lawrence McKeown from Antrim began his fast on June 29th.
As I say, it was one of the more luckier ones I was in it, that I wasn't as sick during it. But one of the things, regardless of that, is that your body does start to beating away and ultimately damaged. At a stage of about 40 days, I started to take double vision, hazy vision. As time went on, that turned into like a flickering. Sight became very difficult. In the very latter stages, we're into over 60 days. Hearing would have become difficult also. There's also the thing of not being able to tolerate loud noise or bright lights. And I think part of that's just the general state of the body. Wanting just to be at rest with itself. I was on it 70 days on the hunger strike. At the end of it, my eyesight was very bad. I now have what's called nystagmus, which is involuntary twitching of the eyeball. It would have been particularly bad just at the end of it, to the extent that I couldn't see someone, or I couldn't distinguish their features only a few foot away. And since then, I suppose it's been a battle to regain most of that health.
On the 11th of June, Kieran Doherty, 20 days into his hunger strike, and Paddy Agnew, another Long Kesh prisoner, were elected TDs in the 26 counties general election. All the other H-block candidates polled well, showing the mounting concern and support of the people of the 26 counties. With Joe McDonnell entering the dangerous stage of his hunger strike, another delegation, the Irish Commission for Justice and Peace, a Southern Irish group of priests and politicians, began to try to negotiate with the prisoners. They had no power to formulate a solution. While this delegation toed and froed from the prisoners and the Northern Ireland office, a more serious attempt to resolve the strike was going on in secret. A complicated game of British brinkmanship was taking place as Joe McDonnell neared death. The negotiations were abruptly halted on July 8th. The reason became clear when the news broke that Joe McDonnell had died. Joe McDonnell's funeral was attacked by British forces trying to capture the IRA Colour Party. Hundreds of plastic bullets were fired, injuring many people, some critically. Throughout the hunger strike, campaigners and protesters had come under sustained attack. Members of the National H-Block Armagh Committee, Miriam Daly, John Turnley, Noel Little, Ronnie Bunting, were murdered by loyalist paramilitaries. Bernadette McAliskey and her husband narrowly escaped death after an assassination attempt. Plastic bullets were the main weapon of terror. In 1981, 16,000 bullets were fired, more than the total for the previous 7 years. Hundreds were injured and scarred. Many children were killed. Martin Herson died agonisingly on July 8th. Huge protests in Dublin after his death ended in riot scenes never seen on that scale in the south. During the hunger strikes, the Irish government had made little attempt to confront the British government, despite the calls by the people. The unrest of this period seriously threatened the stability of the 26 counties, and for the first time since Bloody Sunday, forced Southerners to face the problem of the partitioned state. The Southern establishment and the Catholic Church placed extreme moral pressure on the hunger strikers' families to end the strike.
Father Fall had a meeting with their relatives and sought a meeting with me, which I did. And they explained, in fact, that I couldn't end the hunger strike. But then on reflection, after the meeting was over, I said to myself, well, Father Paul is going to continue to run with this. And I think that it would be useful that we do go along and see the prisoners and explain the situation to them in a way which satisfies the families and gets rid of this piece of propaganda.
The prisoners were told tonight, very clearly, very clinically, and in a very, what I've called a very hard fashion, that they decide what they're going to do and we support them. But we told them very basically that the people who we were talking to, the people in the room, could all be dead. And they said, so be it.
The Kieran Doherty and Kevin Lynch were both very, very close to death. And what we knew from past experience was that British brinkmanship would immediately come into play in that situation. So what we done, the two lads who had been fairly ill and had not actually been physically throughout most of the meeting with Gerry. I think they had been there initially. One of them had been there initially, but they had become so tired that they couldn't sort of survive the whole meeting. We asked that they actually be asked the question straight, because they were the two people right at the front line. Outside the absence of everybody else, that they as individuals be asked whether they considered that was a point to end. And both of them had actually said, look, you know the situation, we've been through it before. If we end it now, then we allow the British to play the game they played all along.
Kevin Lynch became the 7th hunger striker to die on August 1st, followed the next day by Kieran Doherty.
Your position on it isn't that you're going to die, because this is the amazing thing about the hunger strikers. None of them, I think, actually believed that they would die. I don't think you can, right? I don't think you can actually sort of say, I'm going to die in 60 days. You come at it from the positive way. What's going on that's going to save my life? You know, one, the fact that I'm on hunger strike, I'm generating public support and generating political support. People are coming out, they're attempting to force the British to negotiate. So you look at it the positive way. And all the time you have to keep looking at it the positive way. Tom McAliskey, and again this maybe fortifies my point, on the night before he died, he's talking so much about the future. It's depressing certainly looking back. It wasn't depressing at the time. You know, he's talking, here's a guy which, maybe he's going to die tomorrow, maybe he isn't, maybe he's going to live another week or so, or maybe there's going to be a solution, he's not going to die at all. But here's a guy who just sort of, you know, isn't so much pondering on it. He's talking about getting married to his girlfriend when he gets out. He's talking about sort of settling down in South Derry, talking about that he would love to have been a rally driver, only lost one eye. And he's having a visit with his girlfriend the next day, or he's having a visit with his brother. He had a visit with his girlfriend that day. And he's talking, you know, his mind is just sort of so filled with the future. And he's also even, you know, talking about things which maybe sound, you know, which people outside don't talk about, which prisoners often talking about. He's talking about the sort of the type of country that he wants to live in. And this is going on maybe over a period of 2 or 3 hours. We're just talking away together. And he's talking about, you know, that how things could have been so much different, that he doesn't have a problem with his sort of Protestant neighbours, and that even some of those had wrote to him and said how shocked that they were that he would end up in hunger strike and he'd maybe die in hunger strike, and how sorry they were that was the case. And him saying, you know, like, under all this, there's a way to see a solution in this country, but what happens is the people who control this prison, just they don't listen.
I remember at one stage, Dolores O'Neill, her boyfriend, Tommy McElwee, was on hunger strike. She applied for a visit with him, and she was brought off the wing on the Friday to visit him. And she came back, and, you know, she was all saying how he was, that he was very lucid and all, and he was sitting up in the bed and very talkative and all this. And I remember I was in the washroom the next day on the Saturday, and we always kept the radios on constantly for her to hear, you know, if there was a news bulletin or if there was a news flash. And the radio was up there at that time in the washroom. And I remember hearing that another hunger striker had died, and it was Radio 1, and they never named him or anything like that. And I remember saying,
Oh God, what if I've picked this up wrong? How am I going to go down and tell Dolores or tell someone else if I haven't really? You know, it's like you were hoping against hope that you hadn't heard it.
When apples still grow in November, when blossoms still bloom on each tree, when leaves are still green in December, it's then that our love will be free. I wonder.
The same with Mickey Devine. Talking to him again, and it was very difficult talking, because when you're in hunger strike, or from around the period of maybe the mid-30s to mid-40 days, you go into a sort of a stage of sickness where you're told that you should drink about around a pint of water, around 4 pints of water a day for to sort of keep your blood purified and whatever. But you go into this period where no matter what you drink, it's just you're vomiting it up again, and all the impurities in your body are beginning to build up. So your eyesight, you lost your eyesight, you lost your hearing, you lost your speech. But I remember having one, and it probably only lasted a half an hour, but now looking back, it seemed to have lasted hours. One conversation with Mickey Devine, and again him being very much looking till the future, looking till talking revolution, and you're saying, looking back now, you're saying like, how did that happen? And then throwing in with talking revolution, you're talking about, wouldn't it be brilliant to go and get a pint here? That you're actually sort of, you're living right up till the very last moment in life. And it's something it has struck me with them all, because at different times, these were very special people. There were people who would actually die, but at times it was so ordinary.
Mickey Devine was the 10th and last hunger striker to die. Families began to order medical resuscitation when a hunger striker lapsed into a coma. Lawrence McKeown and Pat McGeown, among others, were both taken off. The prisoners, seeing their campaign being undermined, decided to end the hunger strike on October 3rd. They had lost 10 comrades, but they knew that the conditions in the jails would never return to the brutality of before, and that they had won their 5 demands.
Don't say there's a defeat, because if you look at what the British government set out to achieve under criminalisation, they set out to isolate the prisoners and to isolate their organisation on the outside and to denigrate their cause. It's the cause of Irish freedom. The exact opposite has happened. As a result of the heroic sacrifice of 10 prisoners, the world knows about Ireland, and the prisoners have an international recognition of her political status.
The sort of conditions that we have now in the H blocks are, to me, is it's a symbol of what the hunger strike was about. I think we have created the conditions that the hunger strikers set out to achieve. In Bobby Sands' own writings, he talks about Long Kesh being the breaker's yard, right? So therefore, that to me is the sort of primary task of imprisonment for Republicans, no matter where they are, is never to allow imprisonment to become a breaker's yard. I think we have achieved that. Now, recently, there was an article released, and one of the boys in the blocks talked about not only have we smashed the breaker's yard, but they talk about the H blocks being the building site. So as in the future, we hope to put out more politicised people out on the streets. So yes, we have achieved them 5 demands. And at the end of the day, I think everybody will accept that the H blocks is a political prison.
Well, I think it was a watershed, as I've said. All of, whether we support them or oppose them, all of the major shifts in British policy arise from the hunger strike, the Hillsborough Treaty, which was, while it wasn't a shift in intent, it was certainly a shift in strategy. In the Irish domestic scene, the New Ireland Forum, the fright which the Irish establishment got, and all of that arise directly from the hunger strikes. I think that when the struggle's over, when the struggle's finished, that the hunger strike will be viewed as the high point, as a high point, significant turning point of the struggle.
Always reminds me of Nelson Mandela's statement about presupposing that the oppressor has a conscience. I think the hunger strike taught us that our oppressor has none. No conscience, no heart, no pity, nothing.
There wasn't only hunger strikers. Hunger strikers didn't occur, in isolation to events around them. It was also the people in the streets. Just the ordinary people who weren't even members of the movement. The wee part that they played. All that all combined beat the criminalisation policy. Probably a lesson in tactical manoeuvring for any organisation. Don't ever go on any elitist one organisational show, but involve the people in it. And that's what happened when we expanded during the hunger strikes, and the people came in. The people took a leadership of the issue. That there with the sharp end of the hunger strikes, which was what defeated the criminalisation policy.
Doesn't seem quite so long ago. The last time that I saw you, ain't it funny how the memories grow? Seems they always fold around you. Tried to break you in a living hell, but they couldn't find a way. So they killed you in an H-block cell and hoped that all would turn away. They thought your spirit couldn't rise again, but you dared to prove them wrong. And in death you tore away the chains to let the world hear freedom's song. Yet the heartache and pain linger on. They're still here, though it's 10 years since you've gone. But we're stronger now. You showed us how freedom's fight can be won. I wish there was an easy road to choose to bring the heartache to an end. But easy roads are always sure to lose. I've seen it time and time again. If you could stand by me like yesterday, I'd find the strength to carry on. So let your spirit shine along the way, and our day will surely come. But the heartache and pain linger on. They're still here, though it's it's 10 years since you've gone, but we're stronger now. You showed us how freedom's fight can be won if we all stand as one.
But what they didn't understand was the history of Republican prison experience and the very people they sought to criminalise would in fact in the end criminalise them.
Political prisoners! Look at that blanket man!